This is Dish and Dirt with Gary Pickren, South Carolina's only podcast dedicated to the real estate agent craft. And now, the host of Dish and Dirt, Gary Pickren.
And greetings, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Dish and Dirt. I'm your often opinionated, rarely wrong host, Gary Pickren, coming to you from the beautiful downtown Columbia, South Carolina offices of Blair, Cato, Pickren, Casterline. This, the first week of October 2025. Before we begin our show today, don't forget today, October 2nd, is our big Oktoberfest. We're going to have a pickleball tournament over here in Casey, and we're going to raise money for the South Carolina Military Family Care Association. And the way we're going to do that is Blair Cato is going to take on James Fleshman and Foundation Mortgage in a pickleball grudge match. We're going to beat the living crap out of them. And how you win money is you're going to pick the winner by buying a raffle ticket. If you pick Blair Cato and we whip their butt like you know that we will, then you go into a drawing for $2,000 cash. If your raffle ticket is for the loser, you go into a drawing for $500. So if you pick Blair Cato, you have a better chance of winning $2,000 than if you pick James Fleshman and his terrible pickleball team. All right, so y'all come on out tonight and have a good time at that. We'll raise some money for the Military Family Care Association. But today we have an incredible guest. Very happy that I was able to secure Colton Lindsay. Colton, by the way, is an internationally recognized real estate sales speaker, trainer, and a mastermind facilitator. He helps agents go from being a business operator to a business owner, creates real financial freedom, and it creates a life that they can love and not be just tied to work all the time. Colton launched a company called the WGR about 15 years ago, and today it's one of Utah's top real estate brands. He's helped over 1,000 buyers and sellers throughout his career. Today, WGR is North America's top real estate business academy, is one of them, and one of the top masterminds as well. And he has trained over 1,000 agents who become six-figure income earners. With his top clients have generated around $300,000 a month. Yeah, you heard that right. $300,000 a month in revenue. And currently he has over 2,000 agents in his national network at Real Brokerage. Wow, that's pretty impressive there, Colton.
I will say that's older too. We've got over 4,000.
Oh, wow.
It's over 4,000 in the network now. And, but yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me here.
Well, I found you on Instagram several years ago and started following your content there. And I do think it's some of the best content out in the marketplace. You're hitting really important topics, helping agents try to be better at what they do, but you're also hitting these legal topics that matter. And this is what we're going to talk about today is one of those.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm excited. Thanks for having me. Glad we could make it work.
All right. Well, let's talk about the big news this week. If anybody has been watching real estate news, everybody's heard about this. Big news this week is Compass and the Anywhere brand has announced a merger. And of course, that means C21, Well Banker, ERA, Sotheby's, Better Homes and Garden. They're all going to come under this one umbrella of Compass if this goes through. For many of us, it really wasn't a big surprise. Where has been swimming in debt for many years. And experts, in fact, have been saying for years that something was on the horizon here. In fact, I read one of your posts a few months ago where pundits were predicting that Berkshire Hathaway and Buffett might be the buyer, and you said that was not going to happen. And congratulations, you were 100% correct on that. So why Compass and why now? What are you hearing?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to understand why Anywhere has to sell first. It's the debt, but not only is it the debt, but it's the shrinking model, right? Like how they expanded was I could go, let's take Century 21. I could go into an independent brokerage back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and I could sell them on the concept of buying into my franchise. It's going to give them better systems to grow and scale. But now you didn't have the World Wide Web back then. You couldn't connect with people in Florida. So it created this network of real estate across the US and North America. And what propelled them forward was now, okay, well, let's take this into Chile. Let's take it into Brazil, Europe, and they could expand globally. But how the debt came is now all of a sudden that's on their books on corporate. And instead of a 2x multiple, like in Indiana, the value of that company, now it's a 7x multiple. I could go take that to a bank and the bank's going to lend me. That's how they borrowed. They got long-term debt. Now I take that long-term debt. How am I spending it? How you could use to spend that money was through marketing and sales. And if you look at the expenses of all of those franchises within inside of Anywhere brand, they spend it all on marketing and sales, not research and development. Very little was research and development. And so if you take a look at, okay, how the world has changed just in the last 5 years and 10 years, technology has been a major piece of this puzzle. They have not invested there. Plus the market conditions, it's not real easy to refinance all that debt at a way that makes sense on their expenses. So they're stuck, right? Then you got to look at the pressure from real estate agents. As the world changes, like you've talked before the podcast, since the NAR settlement and things changing there, that's a sign of a crisis of the industry and things are changing. Real estate agents want to know that they have a certainty for the future for their career. And the first thing they look at is, how do I get paid? And so they look at, say, Century 21 or Better Homes and Garden, any of these companies, and they say, well, I'm paying quite a bit in this franchise fee. So let me go to a company where I'm not paying that franchise fee and save some money. Right? I just met with an agent a few days ago. He's with ERA, that's under the Anywhere brand. And his team pays somewhere around $300,000 just in franchise fees. This is franchise fees, right? And so it's like, what could I do with that 300 grand if I'm not spending all of that on ERA? Well, I could take it and reinvest and create some more certainty in my business. That's where realtors are looking to enhanced opportunity. So they're going to other companies. But then what's the risk for a company like Century 21 or Coldwell Banker? Well, the way our business is set up to fund and pay for the operations comes directly from the franchise fee. I don't have another way to cover the operating cost. Okay. So I think it's important that your listeners understand that. I made a video several months ago and I said, the only reason that Anywhere has not been purchased is because of all the billions of dollars of debt and how it's being managed, right? Then it's like, okay, when this deal came, why Compass? Compass is very clear that they want to get rid of the MLS. They're not quiet about it. Right. They had the whole back and forth with Zillow. I don't even know where that situation is anymore. And there's this portal war going on. So now all of a sudden you think Anywhere brand has 1.2 million transactions a year. I don't know, some are 340,000 agents globally. They have this giant system to feed data into what they're trying to accomplish. They're building a portal, essentially. They can take that portal, and if the deal goes through, like, I think people need to understand this deal's not done. It's like, it's in escrow. We got due diligence. We got to know what we're actually buying and see if we're buying a real problem or something that's going to help us. So next July, that's when we really know if this is going to work. But the idea is, now I control this data. Can I go to Zillow and say, hey, I'm not on the MLS with my data. You want access? Pay me for it. Or they don't even need to do that, and they just control the data and they control the flow of leads. I think that's personally why this is happening. I think that Anywhere is still stable enough to be cash that generates, but I also don't think that they care that the franchise models stay around. They said they're not going to change it, but do they really care if it stays around? With the next obvious step is they go one by one. Well, you know what? Yeah, I know that franchise doesn't make sense. Let's roll it up into Compass. They'll just increase agent count that way, and they still control the data. I think it's a data. If you think the future of real estate will grow company-wise based on purchasing transactions. And that's what they've done. They've purchased transactions.
And that's what I was going to ask you about. It seemed to me, and I saw some of your posts about this earlier. I think you did one yesterday or today. One of your biggest belief in this, when you really look through it, is the data. Is 100%. The reason that Compass would take on this kind of debt, which, one of the questions I was going to ask you is, obviously Anywhere's drowning in debt. So this is why they're looking for that life preserver. But why would Compass do that? If it's really this Zillow and this data, that pretty much explains it.
100%. And here's the thing, I don't know exactly what Compass's debt is. I haven't really looked that far into it. I can't imagine it's more than a half a billion, maybe, I don't know. So let's say that you add that together, in total, they have $4 billion in debt for a $10 billion valuation. It's a pretty good investment as far as creating value in the entity. Mm-hmm. Now they can restructure debt. The thing that will help them make it a win, and I don't know if many people paid attention into the press release, they believe they can reduce operating expenses by over $225 million. I watched a very similar thing outside of the real estate space, but I'm very familiar with this. We watched it in Anytime Fitness when they merged with Orange Theory Fitness. There were two brands, very big brands, that were starting to struggle since COVID with how gyms work. Orange Theory never really recovered. Now all of a sudden they have all those high expenses. But if I can marry these expenses, which services all of these people, and I can cut out hundreds of millions of dollars, I can reverse profitability. That's how these mergers and acquisitions work. I'm not so convinced that this isn't a cash flow opportunity for Compass as well. I think it really increases their cash flow. Whether you look at Berkshire or Anywhere, they still are generating lots of cash, but the long term of that, the cash is shrinking And I think everyone sees that. But now we marry these companies, increases cash flow, increases value, gives a win for Compass on what their goal is in data, gives a win for Anywhere for an escape route of the problem that they're in. I think overall this is actually can be a pretty big win for a lot of people. I don't think this is a bad thing. I do think it's interesting to see. I don't think it's a bad thing in the sense of the people that are involved. I think it can be a dangerous thing when it comes to changing long-term of a central hub of data for real estate.
Yeah.
We have to remember there's a lot of Century 21s and these other entities outside of the US, they don't run on a central hub. So they're used to that in Europe or Chile or whatever. That could really change fundamentally how real estate's always been done here in the US. I don't know what that looks like. And I don't think that the DOJ really has a way to stop it, nor do they actually care. I think it creates marketplace, right?
And I definitely want to get into that here in a second. Staying on this theme with Zillow, I think a lot of people need to understand that Refkin, as I understand, was a hedge fund manager. Was in hedge funds before he was in real estate. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so he's not looking at this from a real estate sense. He's looking at it from the data. And I've had several big names nationally in real estate have always told me that Refkin's all about the data. This is what he's all about. And I think that is really where this war with Zillow and the MLS and Clear Cooperation all kind of circle back together. He wants to have the data. He wants to charge for the data, control the data. And that's what this might be about. And so it certainly is something to look at. Now, we talked about the debt. Can you kind of go over those numbers again about what kind of debt that Compass looks like they're going to be assuming here?
So there's long-term and short-term debt. And these, don't quote, these might not be exact numbers, but it's around, with short-term and long-term, right around $3.4 billion. And I'm thinking that the long-term is somewhere around the 2.6 to 2.9 billion. And someone can really dig in and look at that. But it was maybe 10 years ago, 2012, we could look at the numbers. It was over 7 billion for the Anywhere brand. When they changed from Realogy into Anywhere, 7 billion. And how they got it was clear up into pre-internet. Like, you look at what happened around 2010 to 2015, all of a sudden, real estate agents no longer needed the franchise to connect with other agents. 2010, that's when I started making YouTube videos and I started connecting with agents all across North America. By 2014, I was monetizing the agent infopreneur space, and yet Facebook groups coming on. And 2015, 16, 17, 18, Instagram starts to explode. Then you got Snapchat, then you got TikTok. Now all of a sudden you've got a global community of real estate agents that say, hey, wait a second, I don't need the C21 brand. I don't need the broker. The broker needs me more than I need them. And so you see some models that have come around, like I think EXP is one. I think what Real's doing is, well, I think you see a lot more brands developing that they say, hey, actually, we need the agent more than they need us. How do we build a platform that they want to be here? And you're seeing that directly with these agent-owned platforms. I think the vehicle going forward is the vision is different in some of them, but I think ultimately agents that go to these companies saying, hey, wait, my brand is what owns the transactions, not Century 21, not Coldwell Banker. I don't need them. And I think that's where the real value is in those types of companies, which will be interesting because it differs from Compass. Like Compass goes to like a top agent in, say, Miami and say, hey, let me buy you to come over here. See, their strategy is to buy transactions, where EXP or Real or some of these brands like Realty America is really growing now. Their strategy is, hey, let's partner with these brands and let these, like my brand, I'm a brand, right? Let's partner with these brands and let's grow transactions that way and bring them over that way. I think it's just a different style. I personally bet on obviously the Real model. I'm not a heavy better on Compass long-term, but they're doing something that's making it work in the market.
You make an interesting point. I have looked at the model as being a failure because what we've done to ourselves. You're looking at it more as to an extension of the growth of the internet and the ability to expand your brand and your business outside. Where I was looking at it, and I think maybe both of them still play in this. Ron Rowe, who used to be the CEO of Russell Jeffcoat, which was our biggest independent many, many years ago, told me back in the day, brokerages made their monies on newbies. They don't make money on the 90-10 split. So the agents who have been out in the business a while, have grown a business and have gotten to the 90-10 split, and back then 90-10 was a big to-do to get to a 90-10 split. that the companies weren't making money on them. They made all their money, these people coming right out of real estate school, and you can make 60/40. And that was why you had to recruit so many new agents every year to keep bringing in the 60/40s. Well, the problem is now you have models that cap out at certain dollar amounts. You have some brokerages that charge a flat $295 per transaction for people coming literally right out of school. So you make no money off of somebody coming right out of school. And I actually had a broker this year ask me, how can I be the number one broker in South Carolina? And I said, you charge like a desk fee of like $250 a month. Why do you want to be the biggest? All you're going to do is create more headaches, more people to supervise. So how much of it do you think the model that we have falling somewhat ass backwards into is affecting what you're talking about as much as it is the internet, or is it just one or the other or both?
I think it's all of it. So if you look at businesses and industries, they have life cycles. They start as infants, then they become toddlers, then they become teenagers, young adults, and then they get to this peak level to where then every one of them will have a midlife crisis. And when there's a midlife crisis, a business can either reinvent themselves and kind of start over a little bit and move forward, or they can go to assisted living. They can then die out. Mm-hmm. That's what the real estate industry is going through. It's just going through a giant, and it's been going through it for about the last decade. And you see the signs with government regulations change. You see the signs with the DOJ saying, like, they've been on their NAR's back for a while. The settlement that happened, the different change in culture, where you have a different generation, right? More and more millennials are now stepping into this game. And the millennial generation is bigger than the boomer generation, right? We were delayed. We're different. The millennials believe in community and collaboration, whereas the boomers believe in, I say this with politeness because I've studied. You want a really, really good book to go through this. This isn't just my opinion. It's called The Fourth Turning is Here by Neil Howe. The boomer generation is a very entitled generation. And I say that with kindness because after World War II, they only really know peace. I'm not saying there weren't challenges along the way, but they really knew peace and prosperity of garnering global trade, and you could have strong middle class. But what we've seen the last, probably since the financial crisis of '08, we've seen a complete collapse of how the global economics has worked and the global order. And we're seeing we're going to start to see a reorder of that. I don't think it's completely collapsed yet. I think we're still seeing the collapse, and that includes specifically the real estate industry that represents 1/5 of the U.S. economy. So I don't think it's just the internet. I don't think it's just the model changing. I think it's all of it above that. It's just kind of created a perfect storm of all of these things.
Well, one of the things you mentioned that Refkin's talking about is saving $225 million on debt by combining services. If he cannot reorganize these under some umbrella, is that going to put this deal in a big problem area for him?
The only reason the deal wouldn't close is if they can't really. So when you look at it, they're doing due diligence. That's an estimate. They're going to go through a bunch of forensic accounting, and then they're going to get creative on how do we change this? And I think it's going to happen for both sides. I think Compass, but I think Compass being more the tech side. Like, I think it's interesting because Compass is valued at like a $4.4 billion market cap, but they have pre this, maybe 30,000 agents. I don't know how many they have, 30, 40,000 agents, right? But they got a $4 billion market cap. So what they're thinking we can do is, can we reduce those expenses and then start to solve some of Anywhere's problems with our tech? And it will be white labeled at some level because they're not changing those brands anytime soon. But then it's like, okay, well, what are the clunky things that we can get rid of so that we can start to save expenses and then make this more profitable?
So do you think there could be some selling off of some of these brands? Now, that's one of the things that I have been hearing is that somebody like Berkshire would buy the whole thing and then maybe spin out C21 or spin out.
I don't think Berkshire is going to stay in this business much longer. Personally, I personally, you think what drives the Berkshire brand, if you ran the data, now this is just me kind of assuming and observing, I would love to see the actual data. Most people at Berkshire Hathaway are the older generations. They're not the younger generations. Mm-hmm. And the why Berkshire Hathaway does so well is they just have a cash cow of people's databases that have been in the industry for a very long time, but they don't have new blood going into the system. And I think long-term, it makes sense that they don't stay in this industry. I don't think that they will. I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. I base a lot of what I look at based on generations and how generations do things. And I also look at, if you ask your audience right now, what do you think when you think Century 21, Coldwell Banker? They're going to say old. out of date, Ben Gay and mothballs. Like, I'm not making this up. This is what the consumer's saying. This is what real estate agents are saying. And I think Berkshire Hathaway falls into that category to some degree. And I personally don't think long-term Berkshire Hathaway will stay in this game. I think that they'll get into better games.
When you talk about selling data, or they're in it for the data, there's some agents out there that don't know what that means. What are we talking about? What are they selling, and who are they selling it to?
But you think about, like, when you hear this goofball on the internet say people should be able to use the MLS for free. Well, technically you can. You can log on and you can look at the data there for free. It's free. But what they're saying is, well, let me list my property on there for free. But you have to back up and think, who owns the multiple listing services? It's typically realtor organizations or brokers in different areas. And then where does the data from the MLS come from? Well, I knock a door, I talk to a for sale by owner. They say, hey, yeah, I'm going to list my home with you. I then gather their data. I upload it into the multiple listing service, and now it's contained into that. From the multiple listing service, what realtors have done, which is, I think, just crazy, if they just said, hey, let's give it to Zillow. They've pretty much let Zillow take advantage of them. To me, what the play should have been, and not only did that, then Zillow sells that shit back to them. What they should have said, yeah, we'll do that, but it's going to cost you because our data is the value. And so now all of a sudden, if Compass can go and say, I'm a Cinch 21 agent, I go knock that door, I convert that FSBO, or even better, I'm a boomer that's got 30 years in this industry and I've just got a clockwork business of transactions happening. I can feed that instead of through the MLS, I can go into Compass's database. And then they own that, and that becomes the value. They can decide how they monetize that. I don't know if this explains, but that help explain in terms.
The problem with all that, and that's where my concern of this entire merger happens, is that essentially this really brings down to the dismantling of clear cooperation. And Refkin has been absolute, screaming from the top of his lungs that he's going to get rid of clear cooperation. Same time, I've had Leo Perea and James Dwiggins on my podcast, and both of them have made no secret that they disagree with Refkin. They think it's self-serving, that Refkin's doing this so he can make more money, and I think they're correct.
I agree. Why would it not? Is he saying that because his argument is that the seller should be able to choose.
Yeah, the seller should be able to choose. This isn't about seller choice. The number of sellers that actually want to not be on the MLS is minuscule.
I'm going to push back on that. I think both can be true.
Okay.
And I think what makes great business people is that they can manipulate truths to gather their return on investment. I think
that's also called a politician.
Politicians do it. Business people do it. I mean, you saw the whole thing with the whole Jimmy Kimmel, right? You break that whole situation down. Why is Nexstar and these companies refusing to do it? Yeah, it can be true that they don't like what Kimmel said, but it could also be true that they want to be on the Fed's good side because they're trying to get the merger to come through. So both can be true. That Refkin says, yes, sellers should have the choice. I agree. Because I would take listings all the time, and I didn't want to put it on the MLS all the way, so I'd have them sign a document that we weren't going to do it. I think the seller should have a freaking choice. Sure. At the same time, though, as a seller, I'm not putting my house on the market till it's on the freaking MLS, right? Like it's absurd not to do it because it's the market. So right. I think both can be true, and I think ultimately, I don't care who you are. I'm at the end of the day, I want to make as much money as possible while impacting as many lives as possible, and I believe I'm doing it the right way. Refkin and Leo Pereira, they just disagree on what serving the consumer actually looks like. I think they're both right. And I think that they both just have a different opinion on how to achieve the outcome.
My concern with getting rid of the clear cooperation is it would destroy fair housing. I just had lunch with a minority business owner who told me that. He said, look, I have 5 African-American agents and my clients are predominantly African-American. In order for my clients to if this merger goes through and they take all of their listings and keep them all in-house, it's 40% of our market, if not more. My African-American clients aren't going to get to see those properties. And he said,
why wouldn't they be able to see those properties?
If they kept up all these listings in-house for 30 days, how does his clients ever get to see them? They're all in-house listings. Well, the only way they get to see them is to go work.
And how they do it is they're no longer his client.
Right. They have to go work with one of those that do not have high levels of minority agents working for them compared to these other smaller independents.
Maybe.
And his comment to me was, from his experience, Mortys prefer to work with minority agents. That's his experience. And so he's like, if these companies don't have higher numbers of minority agents working for them, then a higher percentage of minorities are going to be blocked out of the market. So I think there is a big fair housing issue there. I also think it's kind of an antitrust issue too is that if you have a brokerage, I was talking to one of my brokers of the day, Yolanda Taylor, about this. She's a small brokerage, happens to be a minority as well, but she has 6 agents. If Anywhere and Compass can take all of their listings and keep them all in house, how does she continue to operate in business?
Well, I think, let's be clear. I don't think that even if they keep them in house for 30 days, I don't think there's going to have as many. I could be wrong. I don't think they're going to have as many of those properties sell as they think.
Right.
I
agree.
I don't think that they'll actually, I think this is more about securing the contract than it is executing the contract. Because now I can get my client who's maybe not ready to sell to sign a listing contract with me. We'll test the market for 30 days in-house, but I think we all know that the truth is it's unlikely to actually sell. Then we'll expose it to the full market.
And see, in those situations such as domestic violence, celebrity, or whatever, I see the need for not wanting to be on the MLS. The problem I have with Refkin is he's pushing every consumer to do it first. And there was an article written last month from a journalist who actually went through one of these programs, listed in-house, got a contract within 24 hours, very happy, contract falls through. The second contract she gets was on the entire market for $100,000 more. And her comment was, why did they talk me into doing this in-house? It would almost cost me $100,000.
Yeah, I do agree.
My question, I guess I'm getting to with you on this is, how are they going to marry these two cultures together? I mean, if you look at Anywhere, it's a legacy giant. It's the old tried and true, the blue bloods of real estate, if you will, where Compass kind of brands itself as this new slick tech forward type disruptor of the industry. That's two very different ways of looking at it. How do they marry themselves in this?
So Anywhere's decision to go through this to me is about survival. I don't even think it's so much as survival as it is extended life. And I think Compass knows that. And I think that they think that the Anywhere model is not about saving them long term. It's about giving them enough life that we can suck the data out of them and then let them die off. I don't think that you marry the culture. I think you let Anywhere's culture die off.
Okay. That's fair enough. One of the other things I continue to hear is that Refkin's play here will be to change the industry. That if he has this many people, then he will be able to go to NAR and effectuate the changes he's demanding NAR and the MLSs. What do you think?
Okay, I want to go back to the last question for a second.
Okay.
The other thing we have to look is at macroeconomics. You go to France, Italy, all of Europe, South America, South Africa. They are easily 10 years or more behind North America when it comes to how real estate is transacted. So those models of Century 21 or Coldwell Banker, they're thriving outside of the US and growing because there's not the central hub there. And most agents there are not taught. Well, they don't have very clear licensing there. So pretty much anyone can say, I'm going to be in real estate, but they don't really understand how to go build a listing-based business. So now all of a sudden they can go in and they can teach that and they can create structure that does not exist. There is opportunity outside of the US with those franchises currently. And so it will prolong cash flow to expand that way and they'll sell those franchises. So I want to make that clear. Is like, there's a balancing act going on, in my opinion, of we can still continue to increase cash flow outside of the US. We can get the cash flow in the US and Canada while it lasts, and we can suck all of the data out of them as it dies off. It's not about making the local US North America franchises survive. It's about getting as much out of them while they're still alive.
Okay. And then what do you think about NAR and the pressure that Refkin can now push on NAR and MLS? Do you think that's part of this, or?
I think that the pressure against the NAR, there's part of it. I don't know how they're going to put the pressure against the MLS, because it's something that's owned, and that I could say that association, a local board owns it. They could sell it. They can sell the rights to that. Now, if they start to sell that and Compass could get ownership of it, I think that causes a challenge. I think NAR, they're getting pushed simply because of the leadership in NAR is still the older boomer generation or the boomer generation, older Gen X generation. Their brain does not think the way that Refkin's does. It just doesn't think the way that Tamir's does or Leo's does. And they can't understand how the new generation of younger Generation X, millennials, and Gen Z operate. So they're still making leadership decisions based on as if millennials will respond as if they're boomers. Does that make sense? I think I think a lot of people see that the leadership at NAR is like a giant opportunity to prey on, because they just have their heads so far up their asses, they cannot figure out how to go into the future.
In the few minutes we have left, I've seen you talk about this in the last day or two. what should real estate agents be doing right now in light of what's going on in this industry? These models are collapsing, business debts are going crazy in these brokerages, that we're in for a major fundamental change in real estate, not only just from the structure of Sitzer Burnett, but even from this possible merger. What should agents be doing now for themselves?
Well, I think there's a few things. There's two things that always drive business no matter what's going on: innovation and marketing. Innovation is about constantly making your clients' lives better. Marketing is about building awareness on how you do it. And so the first thing is build a personal brand that attracts your type of people, and you control audience. That's the first thing, is you got to get great at controlling audience. Then the second thing is you got to scale with AI. You got to embrace AI. And I don't just mean use ChatGPT to write your listing description. I mean, we're using AI in my company to follow up in text messages to set appointments. AI will be writing contracts in the next 12 months, in my opinion, off of the directive of a human telling it what to do, right? So you got to scale with AI. You got to really embrace it to a level of functionality. Most people are at play mode still. They use ChatGPT a couple times a week, maybe a couple times a day. My company is using it by the minute at this point. So you got to start to embrace it as a level of functionality. And then I think the third thing is you have to start thinking of how can you monetize your brand differently than has happened traditionally in the previous 40, 50 years in this industry. And remember that 1/5 of the US economy, I don't know Canada's numbers, 1/5 of the US economy is still real estate transactions. And how the economy works is when a transaction happens. So if you can build a brand that markets and stays in the middle of the transaction with AI as well, you'll be able to make money.
Last question. Who's the next brokerage to fall?
Could be wrong on this, but I think it's only a matter of time till RE/MAX gets purchased. You look
That's what I
at
was thinking.
RE/MAX and Anywhere similar in pre-COVID, profit margins were already narrow, maybe 4%. They're -1 at this point. I think where RE/MAX has longer runway is the fact that they don't have as much debt. That's the positive for RE/MAX. I think they've grown really based off of production versus marketing and sales. They grew off of cash flow instead of debt, which I think gives them a longer runway. But I still think that their model becomes very difficult to compete as generations change in how agents want community, they want collaboration, they want to be able to have remote access in their business. So I think it's RE/MAX. I think Berkshire is just a matter of time till they figure out how to do something different. I don't think they've got a cash flow problem at this point. Didn't they pay a couple $100 million in their own settlement themselves, right? I don't think it's a cash flow problem for them yet. I think it's a logistics of, do we want to long-term be in this industry, and for how long? And when we talk industry, we're not talking real estate at that point. We're talking real estate agent industry. There's kind of two industries running parallel. There's real estate industry and there's real estate agent industry. And so they have to be able to retain agents. And how long can they retain agents before they don't want to be a part of that model anymore?
Are you seeing this consolidation 5 years from now? Is it all a consolidation into 2, 3 big companies, or do you think it's going to be different than that?
I think you're going to see a consolidation in many industries, including real estate. And I think that's how capitalism have worked stems back from how they print money into thin air. I think that's really a lot of it stems back to.
Okay. Well,
I also think I think it rolls into, like, there's some curious things that we've seen happen in the last decade. Well, we've always seen it, but there is a lot of corruption going on inside of politics in the US, Canada, UK, everywhere. And so the question becomes of, like, okay, look at most politicians in the United States. How many of them, their main business is real estate or development? A lot of them, or some type of business development. And they get in, they start with a state House of Representative, and then maybe a state Senate, and then maybe a state senator for the federal side of things. They run for Congress, and it's so that they can move things a specific direction that benefit them and their peers that they're in relationship with. And we've been doing that for a long enough period of time to keep the Fugazi moving. We've printed ridiculous amounts of money into existence to where now people that know how the money flows, they can just get billions and billions and now trillions of dollars we're seeing, while masses don't understand how all of this works economically. And I think that it will move into 2 or 3 really big companies.
All right. Well, let's end it on that. Tell us, how can everybody find you? I know how to find you, but I think everybody should start following you on social media because you have great content.
Yeah, I think the best place to connect with me is Instagram. You can just search me under the WGR. So THEWGR. on Instagram.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'd love to have you back again because there's about 15 other topics I'd love to talk more in depth with you about.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. Well, that's all the time we have for our show today. I appreciate y'all joining us once again for Dish and Dirt. Come back again next week for another episode. Don't forget to like us, share us, and subscribe. Y'all have a great weekend.